I can't believe how excited I am with these silly blocks. This potato chip block is a lot of fun to work with. And I think I've made like 4 different projects, and this is number 5. And I keep saying it's going to be the last, but I keep getting more and more. These are the leftover strips from the last 4, 2 quilts and 2 hot pads. And so I'm going to use these, and I still have to cut these out. So I had a lot of charm squares is what I started with. So I took my charm squares and I just kind of grouped them by colors because I want to make sure that I have a good blend of colors and that I have enough of everything and not just 1 or 2 of this and 20 of another. So that's kind of where I'm going. This is my center square like the one I just made. And so what I'm doing is I'm stacking my charm squares, which of course are 5 by 5. And then what I do is I cut a 1/2 inch off the bottom and cut them in half to get my 2.5 by 4.5. And then I have 2 identical stacks. So what I'll do is I'll work off the top stack, and that'll make sure I'm mixing up my fabrics. And if I need more, I'll go to the bottom half. Now, I also had some strips. I'm working on cutting these. So scraps of any kind, as long as they're big enough, at least your 4.5 by 2.5. Charm squares are great, fat quarters, jelly rolls, things like that. All that's going to work. And I figure for what I need, I'm going to have at least 450 to 500 of these squares. I can't even begin to tell you how many I have because I haven't been counting, and I don't know how big a stack I need for that many. So this will be an adventure, and if I have more left over, I'm going to need ideas of what to make next. So let me show you where we're going here with this. I'll get started, and we're going to make a quilt. The first thing I've done with my strips, the 2.5 by 4.5 inch pieces, is I sewed them into pairs. I just randomly grabbed pairs, and they're all kind of twisted here. And what I did is I just sewed them together. I chain stitched, and I just went. And I tried to, mix up lots of fabrics and grab from different stacks. And there's not really any pattern or anything that I did, but I did try to incorporate as many lights as darks, but yet I also put multiple darks together. I didn't make everything be, 1 light and 1 dark, so it looks like an alternating pattern. I didn't, want it to be that evident or that strong, like, here's a couple dark ones, and I just think that's going to add a lot of interest. I do have a lot of light colors, so I'm being careful not to get too carried away. I like the quilt being a little on the lighter side than dark, but more with color. I really want to have a lot of color that's going to add that interest and not use so much of the low volume, which I love, but I'm going with a different look here. So this is the stack that I've already done. Like I said, these are all chain stitched, and I'm just going to go through and cut these apart. There are about, I think, approximately 160 pairs here. So that's just over 300 of the blocks that are sewn together. So that's more than half of what I'm using. So this is a good place to start. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is come in, and obviously I'll cut these apart, and I'm going to sew maybe half of these together. So then I'll have pairs of just 2 blocks, and then I'll have other sets that'll have 4, because I'm going to use a lot of those larger strips when I get to the outer edges. So the more that are pre-assembled just makes it easier for me. And then when I get to the side of the block that has the odd number, I have a lot of single blocks that I can just tack onto one end or the other. Because remember, as we build this square, we're going to put 2 here and here. Then we're going to go with 3. Then we'll go 4 and 5. And so we just keep working that number, and as we work out, we're going to have more and more. And so that's what I just sort of need to figure out. I haven't done one like this before where I just keep adding on, and that's what I'm excited to see, just how it comes out and what it looks like. So let me go do some more sewing, and then I'm going to start assembling the block, and I'll take you along with me and show you how it works. I'm all set up to get ready sewing and get started here. I did change my needles. I like using the Schmetz quilting needles, and size number 11 is what's recommended for quilting, and I use that a lot. Sometimes a 10 works well for very light fabric. You get smaller holes, but as you get into heavier fabrics, thicker layers, flannels, denims, you will bump up to a 14 to a 16 I always use on denim. So that's an idea, and I leave them on the card because I find these little guys, when you take them off, they can be kind of hard to find, and so I just slide the cover back and forth, and this part folds so I can just pull my needles out. So that's really handy, and those I always keep close by in case I break a needle, which happens. And most times I find when I break a needle, it's because I'm using a lot of fabric, a lot of layers, it's thick, and I'm trying to sew too fast, and it bends the tip of the needle, and that's what breaks it, because the needle will hit the throat plate down here, and that'll break it every time. And if you look close, you can see there's a lot of little nicks in there. So I've broken my fair share of needles needlessly just because I was in a hurry. Now I have my long piece that is all the chained piece, strips. And I'm going to call these strips. They're not really a block because it's a single unit, and it's a 2.5 by 4.5. So when I'm talking about strips, this is what I'm talking about. But then we also have piece strips. So I'll try and get that all straight as we're moving along. But I took the really long one that had about 150 or 60 pairs sewn together. And I have each end of that accessible to me. The rest of them are tucked in a bag next to me, so as I pull these out, I'll get more as I go. Now, as I'm sewing, I'm going to start with 2 on each side, and then I'm going to continue going around. As I go around the circle, and sew everything in the like a log cabin. You go in a circular pattern and you just keep going in the same direction. Then you will need to add on to your pieces. But we start with 2 for this particular block. And because this is the darkest blue, I'm going to put it over here by the dark blues. That's more of a purple, but I just think that works. And I always sew with my seams coming towards me, the same direction as my needle coming towards me. That way I don't have to worry about the seam going every which way, flipping around, going the wrong direction, getting caught in something that, can create a problem. So I'll start up here, and I'm going to align the corners and just start with my 1/4 inch. So let me get started. And we'll do a little back stitch. Now the other thing I do is I will line the back ends, the bottom ends where I'm heading to. And I will line those up and hold this about 1 inch away. And then as I'm sewing, I sort of hold this taut. That way, if one piece or the other is slightly larger, smaller, this will kind of accommodate for those variances. That's the first thing I do. That way I know I'm not going to get a lot of gathers or puffiness in here, and I'll get a pretty even edge. So when I come to do my next row, everything's going to work out fine. The other thing I do is not every piece that we cut is going to be perfect. And even the machine pieces, the manufacturer cuts, depending on the time of day or the fabrics, they're not always exactly the same. They're probably a lot closer than ours are. But when I get a little variance like this, what I do is I split the difference. So I want to hold this up so you can see. Instead of putting it all the way over to this edge, I will kind of put it between. So the seam allowance up here is a little wider on the bottom, and then it's going to be a little closer down here. Does that make sense? So instead of leaving a big gap up here, I split the difference between the two, and then by the time I get down here, everything is even. And here's that first piece sewn on, and I just want to show you on the back that it's nice and even. You don't see any particular large amount. There's just the littlest bit of that seam allowance, and again, that's just what I call splitting the difference and evening things up. Now, I went ahead and I did this one. So I'm coming down this way, I'm going to spin counterclockwise, and I'm going to sew this way. Did the same thing, get them nice and even, top and bottom. So now at this point, I would go ahead and finger press. Now, I'll tell you, after doing that, I just want to reiterate, it really is better to finger press on the back. And the reason is, when I finger press, a lot of times I'll use my fingernail. And if I press too hard, I can get a lot of little tiny creases, like little tucks in there. So the only time I'll do it this way is if I'm sure I'm using the pads of my fingers, but I tend to always use fingernails, so I just always want to make sure that I am doing it on the back. Otherwise you get those little tucks that are very annoying. All right, so this was side 1 and 2. Then we have side 3 and 4. And I have my pairs, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the next 2. And I'm cutting from each end of my long strip, so I get some good variety. And so I have these 2, and I have these 2 here. Now, I'm going to put these along here, but you'll notice I only have 2. So what I'm going to do, and I'm working this as I go, what I think I'm going to do is just get a single block for each side here. I may decide to go through before I get too far along and sew a bunch with the 3s, because I'm going to need a lot of like multiple strips. The pairs are only going to last so long. So I think as I go, I'm going to increase the size of the strips. So I want something here that's kind of on the lighter side. So I'll go ahead and pull that. And here's a real light one. I like that because it's got a bit of the blue and the purple in there, which is great. Now over on this side, I'm probably, let's see what colors. I don't really have any pink. I have some lavender, but a pink would go good there. And I'll put this in. And because these are prints, I like using batiks. So I'm kind of showing you not just how to assemble this, but how I'm selecting my fabrics. And in the beginning, I probably do more selection than I do as I'm farther along. But this way, because I have batiks and they're all printed, having something a little more plain, more like a watercolor, but it's got those lines work through it. And oh, I like this side because it has some yellow in it as well. And yellow goes great next to blue and purple. So that's the side I'll use. And then over here, like I said, I didn't have any pink really on this level, on this round. So I'll go ahead and add this. So let me sew these in, and we'll add these to the next blocks around, and I'll show you how that works. As you can see, if I do every row this methodically, it's going to take a long time. So I'm just kind of going through these initial steps to show you how I approach this. I'm going to move this over here so it doesn't fall off on the table. So let me get through these couple rounds, and then I will get into some serious sewing to get this finished. So I've got my finger press seams. I'm going to align this here. This is the only seam that's going to go against the direction I'm sewing. So I have to make sure that doesn't flip over. As I'm sewing, because I'm doing the finger press away from the needle, then all those seams on the back are going to go in the direction I'm sewing, so they won't flip over. It's just always going to be that first one, and that's just the nature of how we're doing it. And that's because I'm sewing or pressing all these seam allowances to the outside, and I prefer doing that because it's going to allow this center to lay down evenly throughout. Now again, when I get to this point, while the rows are still manageable size-wise, I'm going to just grab this, hold that seam allowance down, and hold these pieces together taut so that I know I've got, my pieces aligned evenly. And hold my seam in. See how that wants to go to the outside? I will just tuck that over so it lines up nicely. All right. So you can see once you get to the longer rows how quickly this is going to work. It's going to be really fast. So now I'm going to go this way. Now I sewed here, I come around, and I'm going to sew this way. So I'm going to align my fabric, and before I do anything else, I just tack it with the thread. I'll sew it, I can't get that off, with a couple stitches just to hold it in place. And so I'm there, then I come down to the end, hold my pieces like this, and I just always hang on to that row. Double check, make sure, well, of course we don't have any seams here, but make sure that everything's going in the direction I want. And I'm holding this so you can see that my fabric pieces are nice and snug next to each other. And see how this is wanting to flip? I want to make that go up. So it's going that way because these are pressed out. See how easy that is when you make those seams go the same way. There's no matching seams, which is great, but still you don't want to have seams that are flip-flopping every which direction, because then when you go to press it, it's difficult. When you go to sew your next rows, you're always checking to see which way that seam allowance is facing. Okay, so here we are. If you have any trouble remembering where the top is, just put a pin in there. And I'm actually going to do that now because I don't know that I'm going to get this finished before stopping for any period of time. And when I come back and I'm looking, well, which was this? And I can probably look at the stitching and figure out which was which, but this is easier. This way I always know that's my top. Okay, so that's that. Now, that's round one. It's finished. Now we're going to turn it and we're going to begin the first step of round two. And the first step is where these pairs are right here. I'll back up because this is my first. So I'm going to add a 3-piece. So we ended with a 3. The next row starts with a 3. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I did with these. I have my next 2 strips ready to go. And I just keep that one to the side, because if I drop it on the floor, it's just a challenge to get there. Too many cords and camera and stands and all kinds of apparatus here. So this is off just a little bit, and what I'm going to do is line this up straight with these pieces. It could be that that end was cut on a little bit of an angle. So if I line this right up there, that should work out good. Now, I do this because I found if I line this up to that outer edge, then I'm going to start swinging my rows out, and there'll be more fabric in the middle than there should be. And that's where you can get uneven quilt tops, or you'll have little waves in there that you've got this extra fabric you don't quite know what to do with or where to put it, or it wants to bunch up, and that can become a challenge when you're quilting it. So again, I line up my bottom corners and I grab this piece, and this is where I can show you how these in the back are coming downward, and the first one always goes up. That's just what it does. And so I'm grabbing right here, and I hold this taut so I can just place this as we go. And you can see how that purple one is a little bit larger. So I'm going to split the difference. I'm going to let this kind of go halfway between the two. And I want to make sure this lines up here. And because everything is finger pressed, I don't have to worry about those seams. They're automatically going to go away. And line this one. the other side. And I try and clip my seams as I go. It just seems to make it easier. All right, so I'm going to finger press these in the direction that I'm sewing. These are coming down. That top one always goes up. And there we are. So I'm just going to put this through here. There we are. Like I said, I kind of lock it in with a couple stitches to hold it in place. Come down to the end. So you see how easy that is. Again, once I get to the long strips, this is going to go really fast. So I have my first round, or my first half of round 2. And next is going to be the second half. And where I did 3 here, I'm going to begin with 4. So I'm just going to take my pairs and I'm going to cut 2 from each end. And I'm just going to start using it from that. And that's the whole idea of having these like pre-staged, I guess is the word, in order to have, plenty to work from. So I'll take these 2 and I'll take these 2. And then I'll lay out, decide how I want them, put them together, and there we are. So let me go ahead and get ready for that. I'm getting ready to sew my first 4-block piece on my strip, and what I've done is I have this ready to go. I've finger pressed it down, and this is going to line up down here and here. If it gets hard for you to hold it with your hand and you're more comfortable, then go ahead and lay this over and line up your corners and then just pin the middle. That can often help, and I just want to make sure. The other thing that's really going to matter on this are your seam allowances. And if you find your seam allowance you have a bit long down here, one thing you can do is measure this side to the other side of your block. And let's take a look. So if we line the corner up here and we line the corner up here, they're pretty much the same. They're, like 1/8 of an inch off, and that's not something I would worry about. But nothing says we can't. Let's see, I'm going to go this way, I think. And yes, like that. And so if we find that this is a little too big, again, split the difference. Start with this maybe being just a little bit above, and then this will come a little below there. Or maybe just by sewing, there we go, you'll find that it's going to fit together pretty well. But this is a little bit long, so I'm just going to let a little bit overhang as I'm sewing. And then when I come around and sew the next row on, that'll just become part of the seam allowance because it's not a large piece that's going to be problematic. And again, I'm going to come down here and line up the straight pieces, and then that's going to show me that this wasn't cut exactly straight. So I'm showing you that there are going to be variances you need to deal with, and that's anytime you're quilting. But when you have a lot of the same size piece, it can get a little frustrating because not everything's lining up perfectly. And that happens a lot with log cabins and, anything when you're doing rectangular blocks, quite frankly. And so, just work it so that it all goes together. And don't sweat the small stuff. If you have a piece and you have to cut it off and that's the way it is at the end of the row, then that's that. But you do want to double check your seam allowances, make sure that you're in line, you're being consistent, and see how there's a little bit there. I just put my top fabric right between that and I start sewing, and that's the one that's going to go up, so I make sure that goes in the right direction, and then I'm just going to keep on coming. And because all my seam allowances are facing towards me as I sew, they're in the same direction my presser foot's going. I don't have to worry about where my seams are flipping because they're going the way I want. left, of course, for this one, but that's okay. Just give it another finger press and tuck it in. And let's see where we are here. And see how this is off like just the teeniest bit. So this really wasn't off by that much. If you happen to have one that is, you know how to take care of it. And threads everywhere. I've just started. Oh my goodness. So this one, let's see, how am I going to do this? We'll go this way. Okay, so I sewed down this way. I'm going to come across, and now I'm going to sew down this way. And you can tell because these seam allowances are going down. So as I lay this, I finger press. So I don't do the finger pressing until I'm ready to put the strip on. I know exactly where it's going, and then I can make sure that I'm finger pressing it in the right direction, because I've done it, the wrong way a couple times. And so this looks like it's going to be a pretty darn good match. And so I'm going to line this up. And again, I keep this straight, and I want to make sure this corner isn't down here. So let's say that end was cut crooked. If that's down here, nothing else is going to line up. What I would do is put it up and let that overhang. So when you're lining up your sides and that top corner, just make sure that this piece, see how that's just the littlest bit below? I don't want that. I want it up there, because that will affect the seams. And when you're doing one seam on top of another, round and round and round, problems compound into bigger problems. So the more we can take care of in the small places, the better off we're going to be. So I'm not quite sure how this is going to work when these get long, because that's going to be hard to hang on to. I'm going to probably be pinning along the way at some point. Okay, that seam allowance is the first one. It's going to want to go up. You can see it's twisting because it doesn't know what to do. I don't know, did I finger press this? Yeah, it must have from the back. It feels like it. Okay. And so I'm lining this up, making sure that corner's on the inside. And now I'll line it up to the bottom, and we'll be good to go. Just like that. Pull this in. The adjustments I'm making as I go is to line the sides. I want those sides to be nice and even. And then I line up this bottom corner down here. Okay, so both sides are finished. So round 2 is complete. It looks wonderful. You know what I'm probably going to do is every couple of rounds stop and press this, because that's just going to make it easier to sew, but it'll also make it easier to press later. And as I'm pressing this, I'll press everything out. But you see how all these seams are going in the same direction? Oh my goodness, that makes it so much easier to press. And so we'll just kind of finger press this as I go, and then it'll be easier when I get to the ironing board. All right, let me do a quick press, and then we're going to start doing some more rounds. And here's my block so far with 2 rounds complete. This is my row 1 start point, and so each row will begin, or each round will begin on this side. And I just want to show you how everything is pressed to the outside. You can see that the seams are all going in the same direction. It makes it so much easier. We press these seams to the outside, which leaves everything in the center nice and smooth. I do want to show you the variation between the way I'm doing this and the traditional method of the block for this, for the potato chip block. Like I said, it has a lot of different names, but for now we're using potato chip block because that's what everybody knows it as. And so we have this large square. This piece measures 8 inches finished, and that's equivalent to this piece right here. So what I've done is replaced these, which is a center plus the first round, with one single block. And you can see as I lay this out, then it kind of fills in that spot. But the advantage for me is that I like having the large square. There are fabrics that I like to show off that I don't want to cut up. And again, this is great for memory quilts if you want to put something in there, signature quilts, handprints. Do a classroom of handprints. We did that once when the kids were little. Oh my goodness, that was quite the chore. But the way this starts is just with 2 of the rectangles sewn along the long side. Then you put 1 on each edge. Then you come back and do 2 and 2. And then at this point we add the 3. So the second half of the round is where it gets bigger. And this is where we are. Now I just want to show you the difference of how these look finished. So these are the hut pads, the supersized hut pads that I made, and it's a free pattern. Actually, I'll go ahead and include that down below because this is a free download, and it also gives you a tutorial of how to put these blocks together. And you can see how this looks. This is it right here, and you've got the horizontal blocks, and then you've got the single, and then you just work around. And it keeps going out and out. This one I did a low volume just to kind of lighten it so it was dark in the middle, got real light, and then kind of mid-tones, just to change it up and give it some interest. Whoops, sorry, I hit the camera. This is the block that I'm doing today, only I'm going to make it larger. So I start with a large square and I just work around. And this wasn't anything particularly dark and light other than I did include a lot of light squares, which is what I'm doing with my quilt today, because I think it kind of provides a little better balance. I want it to be a lighter, brighter quilt than to have a lot of dark colors. Dark colors like this, saturated colors are great, but I want to bring in some brightness in between those as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is get my bag that I have all my chain pieced sections in, and actually let me get my rotary cutter because I don't have any scissors, and I'll cut these off. Let's see, I'll cut a couple of these. I'm going to need a 4 and then I'm going to need a 5, so I'll cut a pair of these off. Whoops, I went a little too far there. That's okay, we'll make it work. Just set that one aside. And so what I'm going to do, and this is my plan to make this easily go together, is to bring some colors just randomly, but I want to make sure I'm not putting things where they're going to create a lot of any one particular color. So let's see, I'm going to kind of bring that purple, and so where am I going? I'm going this side first. All right, so we'll get some purple up there. We got a little purple corner, and we'll bring the blues down. There we go. So we've got that one there. And then over here, I'm going to set this way. And I'm putting this down here. I mean, there's a bit of green there and pink, so I could have easily done this. But what I like about where this is placed is that this green and that green are incredibly similar, as is that green. That just works together. Plus, there's a bit of a darker teal that matches up with that. That's not critical, but for me, this is my randomly organized concession, is I like to keep things color-wise in an orderly manner, in that similar colors are balancing each other. Not all that they have to be completely in a row, but that within a close proximity, like right here, look at this. I've got purple, really dark, multiple shades, and then a lighter one, and then some dark purple here. I think that looks really good. And then we come up here, I've got some dark blue, which is over here, then some mid blue, and then this pink kind of works its way in with all of it. It just kind of works. And so while I don't do this, I don't plan to do this throughout the entire quilt. When I'm putting lots of colors together, I like to have little pockets of colors that appear to be not matching, but coordinated. And they are complementary and they work together well. So you have these pockets of color, And like, the way I did the colors around the edge of that center, just to kind of tie everything out. And it brings in these purples so they're a little more visible, and see how that lavender brings this lavender out. And that's kind of my intent when I'm doing this. And I'll probably do the fussiness for the next 2 rows. After that, whatever I cut off, I'm just going to sew on, because that's not really going to matter. What is the most visible spot on your quilt, especially when you have a square in the middle, is the center, because that's where people's eyes are going to focus, is a look in the middle, and then they'll work their way out to the corners. So for me, this is just a way to attract their eyes to the corner, see the colors, think, oh wow, isn't that really cool? I like it, whatever the case may be. And then the rest of it just becomes a frame of, wild colors in every which direction. And that's where I'm heading. So now you know what I'm going to do. I'll get this row together, I'll put on the next 2 rows, and then we'll take a look at it and see where we are. Well, I've got 5 rounds finished, and I love how it's looking. So here's the middle right here. This is 1/2, and I just want you to see the color placement, how it looks. There's lots of colors mixed together, but I really like how the layout is. It doesn't look particularly busy or or I don't know what the word is, but out of control maybe. I really, really like how it's coming together. And focusing on my center block as my primary colorway helped, because I've got a lot of those colors in here. But then I mix in some other complementary colors that have worked out well. Now, I've gone through, let's see, a good part of my pile. I mean, this is a much smaller than it was, but this is working out great, having all these pairs together. What I may do is take like 2 pairs and then take one of my singles that I have left, put it between, and then create a length of 5, because right now I'm going to be sewing with 7, and that way I'll have 5s made up, and all I have to do is add a double and we're good. So that helps save some time. But what I think I'm going to do on the next 2 rounds is put some really light colors in. I have a lot here that I would consider low volume. They're solids, and some are batiks, but a lot of watercolors. Most of them are prints, not most of them, but many of them are prints that have multiple colors. So I think this would look really nice as a sort of like an inner border, and it'll kind of give a break to this continuous color. And I like the idea of that. And this kind of becomes the center medallion of sorts. And then we have the light fabrics around in 2 rows. I would do 2 rows of these and then go back to the color. I think it's going to look awesome. Now, if you were really adventurous, you could take these and, put them this way for this row. And I think that's a bit more than what I want to do. But that would be your 2 rows, wouldn't it? Doing those 2 together, I don't know. I really like this brick layout. I like the offset brick. It's just wonderful to work with. And I think I'm going to continue with that. But that other one, doing the, what do we call those, like rails, is probably the best way to describe it, would be a lot of fun too, and really change up the look, especially if you picked one of the colors that you really want to focus on. Oh my goodness, there's so much you can do with something that is so simple, just by using color. So let me go ahead and get these next couple rows on, and we'll take a look. I'm getting close. Well, my potato chip block is coming out wonderful. It's up to 40 inches, 1 block to make a quilt. This is great. So what I have so far, I'm at 10 rectangles, 10 blocks on each side. And that gives me, what do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows, 8 rounds that I've done. So there we are. This is what it's looking like. And a couple of things I want to show you, but I want you to see how these colors all look. I really like the 2 rows of the low volume. That's going to look pretty darn nice in the finished quilt. So I want to get at least another couple rows on here. Now every round that you make, which is 4 strips, one on each side, adds 4 inches. So I'm at 44, and if I can get 2 more rounds on here, then, or excuse me, I'm at 40. And if I can get 2 more rounds on here, I'll be at 48. And that may be a good place to stop. I'm not sure. But I also have to finish the video. I thought I was going to be able to do this and go ahead and get it quilted. Not going to happen. But what I will do is get this one and the other one finished and quilt them both for you. Because I want to do one of them in the diamonds. I just loved how that hot pad came out. And I want to do one of the quilts in the diamond. But for right now, there is one thing that I do want to show you. As you're sewing, which has gone really well having these pre-pieced and just adding the rows together. Once you get out past the first couple rows, you don't really have to look at or worry about duplicating so much because everything is so spread out. But periodically, in addition to pressing, you want to double check that your sides are equal so that you're going to end with a square. And just in case seam allowances are off or issues like that, you want to make sure that you're staying square. So fold it like this in both directions on one side, and we're just going to come across like this, and we're going to come to the other side, and they should match up. Yep, so that looks really good. And then flip it in the other direction, which is what I started to say a minute ago and got that all confused. Start over here, and what I do is I kind of go to the middle, and I'm not pulling, I just sort of, ruffle it so it lays together more or less, and then just put this on top. All right, there's a lot going on here. And this one. Now this one's about, maybe 1/4 of an inch. So what I'll do is I'll just make note that I'll put a pin in here so that I know this is the longer side. And just make sure I keep track of my seam allowances. And then the next row that I put on will hopefully be the correct size, and then I can kind of ease all that in together. So what I'm doing when I get my strips sewn together, like I said, right now my strips are 10 rectangles long, is I fold this in half as well as the strip. And then I pin, if I can grab this, the middle of the two together. And then I sew this side, and then when I get here, I sew the other side. That way I know the fabric from the strip is distributed evenly, and I'm not going to end up with one end really tight, the fabric pulled, and the other end kind of waffly with too much fabric. So that's kind of the update right now. I'm loving how this looks. I'm so glad I did that low volume round. That's going to be pretty once this is finished. And this is not unlike the hot pad I did. Let me show you that. Because I did a similar low volume strip here, which I think is a lot of fun. It just kind of breaks things up, and I think this helps a lot of fabrics work together just by creating a different color. It's almost like a barrier, a border is probably the better word. And then once you get out here, it all sort of works together. And you can certainly do multiples of these throughout your quilt depending on how big you make it. So there you are. I'll get this finished and show you the final piece. And this is not a quilt in a day. I did spend a lot of time yesterday cutting my strips and then pairing them up. And then after that, I sort of had my big pile and had everything ready to go. And then sewing today, I've easily spent 8 hours on this. Now, some of that was due to recording and getting this ready to show you, but it is a bit fussy. I made it fussier in the middle than it needed to be, so you could certainly do it a lot quicker. But do set aside some time and some thread because you're going to be doing a lot of sewing. But it is so worth the effort. Oh my goodness, I just love this. Okay, moving along. We've got to go get this finished. Isn't this just so pretty? Oh my goodness. I love all the colors in the center, and then the low volume border inside the quilt is fantastic. Now I have these 2 rows or rounds on the outside. I have enough to do 2 more. So I will probably get those added on, so when I come back with this quilt to do the quilting, it'll be just a little bit bigger. And right now it's at 44, and let's see, if we add 8 more, 8 more inches, it'll be about 52 inches. And we'll just kind of see if that's where we stop or keep going. But it'll be a nice little lap quilt, and that's what I'm looking for here. For me, I love the colors. It's pretty, and it'll look beautiful through the summer. And I just think these colors are working well together, and the way the blocks are laid out. For a scrappy quilt, I love the look of this, and it's such an easy way to make a quilt, especially since it's one block, and it's just one giant block that we made bigger and bigger and bigger, and we just keep adding to it, and that makes it so easy. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you give it a try. It is a lot of fun, and it's a great way to use up your scraps. I sure appreciate you being here with me today. Thanks so much for following along and hanging in to the end. This one got kind of long, but I hope you learned a bit and maybe making one yourself in the near future. As always, it's my pleasure to be here with you. Thank you again, and have a fantastic rest of your day.